Hey, welcome to Equity.Guru. This is the Gauntlet series. I'm Chris Parry, your cheerful host, where I take public company CEOs and make them earn their stripes. There's a lot of CEO videos out there where it's like, so what interests you about this sector? I prefer to come at it like, when did you stop beating your wife? So with me today, I've got Gabriel Rene from Versus Technology. What do we call it? Versus Logistics?
No, versus technology.
Okay. Yeah. It gets a variation of names when I'm talking to people about it casually because
there's a subsidiary. There's a Versus Logistics subsidiary that just is focusing on the logistics portion. Yeah.
It's one of those technologies, though, a technology company that, when you're in biotech, it's easy enough. You just say, oh, we have a thing that does a thing. When you're in agriculture, it's like, oh, we grow wheat. When you're in high tech, it's like, okay, well, so explain to me what your knowledge is of technology before I begin my pitch.
Yeah.
Have you had that experience out on the bandwagon run where you had to basically explain like, okay, well, this is a cell phone and this is a mouse?
Well, it always kind of reminds me of the David Letterman interview with Bill Gates, back in the early 90s, where he's asking, he's trying to describe the internet, and he says, you'll be able to stream, baseball games, and you can listen to it through the internet. And Dave goes, have you ever heard of radio? and that's the reaction that you get initially. So, well, isn't someone doing this already?
Yeah.
And the answer is yes, but the way that it's being done has value that's not exactly obvious. And the reason I think that happens is that, and especially in investment communities, right? As an investor myself, the way that you listen to something and make a decision about where to put your hard-earned cash into that you want to grow for yourself and for your family and community, what have you, an important decision. And so you're trying to really do a risk assessment. The problem with typical risk assessments when it comes to something like this is that the starting point that I think most of us take is, hey, there's a mousetrap, and then I understand the mousetrap, and you're going to build a new mousetrap, right? It's essentially like, what's your disruption? And everyone's prepared for the disruptive pitch because that's more or less what most pitches are, especially in tech. Every once in a while, the pitch is not a disruption pitch. It is what I call a foundational pitch. There's a new foundation that's coming along, and someone's going to provide it. And that new foundation powers the next million disruptions. So you think about just Apple coming out with the smartphone, right? We are on PCs, and then all of a sudden we moved to the smartphone. It wasn't Nokia who did it, right? Like didn't come from the people already doing it.
Right.
And the trick was that Steve Jobs understood something, and Apple understood something that the phone companies didn't. It wasn't a phone. It was a little computer, right? We talked about this before. Yeah. So that became the basis for a whole new platform. And that platform became the basis for 1,000,001 disruptions. So Uber disrupted the taxi industry, Airbnb disrupted the hotel industry, DoorDash disrupted the delivery industry, and so on and so forth, right? And most of the apps we use today, and most of our interactions are on these mobile apps. And you couldn't have told anybody that was the case in 2006. But by 2007, that came out, and by 2008, the App Store. And with that is kind of an ecosystem thing. So if the cloud hadn't emerged at the same time, you couldn't have enough compute on the mobile device to really pull it off. And the API economy comes with that. And social starts to bloom because you can take photos and you can tech, all of these things kind of really are foundational moments. So I think that's really been the challenge with Versus, is getting people to go, hey, hold on a second. I know you think this sounds like we're trying to disrupt something. And of course we are, but it's a whole foundational shift that we're right at the forefront of. And now we've seen this with the internet. We've seen it with the World Wide Web.
Sure.
We've seen it with mobile and social and cloud. And now we're going to see it again with all these next gen technology. So absolutely, one of the biggest hurdles is messaging and trying to communicate it more and more succinctly. My first attempt was a 280-page book, so it wasn't that succinct, but we are getting better at that.
So I think about various breakthroughs in technology over the last, 30, 40 years, where if you look at the electric car, it sure as hell wasn't Tesla that invented it. If you think back to the Sinclair back in the 80s. If I think about the internet, I was on bulletin board systems and there was ARPANET and before the World Wide Web burst through and So when we say that, the metaverse, the idea's been around for a while. Hell, Fortnite is a metaverse, right? Like it's anything that it is a virtual representation of where you are. But putting the nuts and bolts together so that everybody across the spectrum can make use of it, like that's the breakthrough technology that that everyone else is allowed to flow through.
Yeah, it's a great point, even with the electric car thing as an example, because I remember back, I don't know when it was, late 90s, early 2000, maybe I'm gonna go late 90s, maybe 98, 99. I'm sure someone will correct me. The EV1 came out.
Yeah.
And I remember I worked on, because they were trying to put audio online and do like digital commercials. And I worked with Real Audio at the time when I was back at CyberLab. They called us and said, "Hey, how do we do this?" And no one really knew how to do it. And so we said, "Okay, here's how we put good compressed audio online, and they could sync up with the advertising or whatever." And I remember that at the time, wow, electric car, this is so cool. Complete bomb, right?
Yeah.
and you could think back to the Palm Pilot. Palm was bigger than Apple. I mean, Palm was huge at one point and completely dusted out. There often needs to be some confluence of innovations that kind of stacked. We get combinatorial effects.
Yeah.
And so the iPhone is an easy one to pick because, okay, multi-touch screens, cloud, computing, and then with all of the sort of GPS and everything else that, the sensors that came with the device that you didn't have in your PC.
Right.
Apple just brought them all together. Almost none of that was Apple's pure innovation. And of course, they've always been really great at not built first, but built best.
Yeah.
And I think that's definitely what our approach is here is like, we are innovating something new, but we are also using that to bring all these other pieces together at the time where their maturity all is sort of crossing the line simultaneously. So I think that gives us, if you can be the glue between all the things, we're not a hardware manufacturer. We're everyone talks about these headsets. Well, we're not going to build headsets. We're not building warehouse management systems. We're not building, logistics, hardware or environment, stuff for tracking. But we're enabling those various sensors and software and integrations to work together in a completely novel way. So if you can kind of find that one thing where you just turn the dial a little bit, and it's more of an integration project, I think those have classically been really successful. Just to wrap it up on the EV point, there's usually some key innovation that you have to be able to pull off. And certainly that was the case with Apple as well, where they developed a new kind of operating system. In the case of electric cars, it was, can you get the lithium ion, battery to work at, can it drive far enough? I think the EV1 drove with like 50 miles or something.
Yeah.
And of course, everyone needed 300 miles. So that was like a big breakthrough.
Right. So for people that don't know what Versus does, I guess we should touch on that. I've been thinking, we had a conversation a couple of weeks ago over sushi about, how to shrink down what you do to a couple of words, and I kind of came up with the Sim-citization of industry. How's that? To be able to sort of sit there in one screen and say, if you could run an entire city in SimCity with transport and traffic and population and smog, you couldn't do that in Vancouver with one person. You have to have people going out with clipboards and people taking measurements. But the number of inputs of data that we now have, to be able to bring all that data together into one place where someone could say, oh, there's traffic over in Vine Street. Let's make some changes. Seems to me to be the most succinct way to describe the spatial web.
So I really like that. I think that it's a very good explanation of what our platform is designed to enable on the spatial web. Our platform is called COSM, and the idea that simulation at scale can provide really in your example, kind of like a industrial or societal GPS, right?
Mm-hmm.
Ultimately what we want from technology is not just automation, right? We want it to basically tell us how to adapt our environment, our world, our processes, our economies, our supply chains in ways that fit. It's kind of like an evolutionary function. And so that's really the ultimate goal here. And I think that what we kind of talk about, the tagline for Versus is imagine a smarter world. And that's exactly like the Sim-cityification of like, I need to run simulations on what is a smart kind of outcome in here. And I need to be able to do that at scale. I need to be able to bring data sources from anywhere, whether that's from databases or from sensors, and have it be contextually relevant to any set of questions I might have about that, which could be around cybersecurity, or could be around physical security, could be around transportation and mobility, or waste management, or just, you know, moving things from A to B in the supply chain, or being able to, like, ideally, one of my favorite and very simple use cases, what if I could just walk in and out of every restaurant and every store, eating and buying and grabbing things in the same way I walk in and out of an Airbnb or an Uber? What if there were just spatial transactions were the whole city, right? That's a very straightforward use case that requires a much bigger integration play, and it needs you to contextualize it. But we already have everybody on maps. We've already got all kinds of amazing information. If you could just bring it out from the screen and into the physical environment, you know, wow, that's a whole powerful, you know, approach to a smarter world.
Is the trade-off on that a lack of privacy?
So without the initial work that we did on what we call the spatial web protocols, the core standards that we've donated to the IEEE, you know, who standardize Wi-Fi and Ethernet and well, electricity for that matter, and all sort of electronics on the planet over the last 100+ years. We did that because we felt that it was privacy was going to be the real critical foundational piece to build this on. And today, if we have a bunch of separate systems controlled by separate organizations, corporations with different interests, yeah, privacy becomes just an absolute dystopic nightmare in this kind of a future world, right? And so what we want is something that, you know, uses these principles of what's called zero trust architectures and zero knowledge proofs, which is really sort of fancy way of saying, I would like every single request that uses my data to ask my permission to use that data. And so I grant Whole Foods, or I grant IKEA, or I grant the local liquor store or restaurant or bank or whatever, I grant them access to, you know, my doctor, I grant them access to my data. And this sort of flipping of who's controlling the data is something that's, you know, being explored by European Union, and we're seeing GDPR, you know, general data privacy rights type laws. California did the same thing. Japan's doing the same thing. And so we are seeing this movement towards data rights, data privacy, and data ownership at the center of the whole thing, because it just turns into this big mesh of everything being tracked. Now, if Uber didn't track you, it wouldn't work. Right. If Airbnb didn't track you, it wouldn't work. If DoorDash didn't track the person bringing you the food, you don't know when your food's coming. So right. There are trade-offs and benefits to data sharing, right, and context sharing. However, we want to make sure that that data isn't just leaking out into these data black markets and being used to, you know, program us in ways that we don't want. So right. Yeah, it's really important that the foundational standardization pieces here can support that. And ultimately, laws are going to need to be drafted around this. And when you go to some place, you're going to say, hey, my comfort level on whether I'm walking into a big IoT, you know, data mesh of traceability. Of course, we see dystopic versions of this in China today. So yeah. There is a battle front here, and it is around privacy and data, but it's something that we've considered from day one. We consider to be a cornerstone to this really working at scale, especially in a democratic society. And I think that the benefits of that are that you get these kinds of amazing data sets and data sharing and automation.
For sure. So your company name is Versus, which obviously points to the metaverse. The metaverse is getting a bit of a bad rap at the moment. Are people screwing it up for those that are actually doing the work?
I don't know if anyone's screwing it up because it doesn't exist yet. It's kind of like it's a bit of a cultural and VC fever dream right now.
Right.
And which, you know, frankly, it's always been, right?
We're ready for Ready Player One, man. Like, let's go.
Yeah. I think that the idea of immersive information, right, that's experiential instead of sort of informational, is better because it's more in line with how we naturally interface with the world instead of with content information that you translate.
Right.
So the metaverse as an immersive, traversable, three-dimensional environment for entertainment and gaming, but also for things like medical and education, and is going to be phenomenal. And I'm completely bullish on it. I think that the Web3 sort of part of the Web 3.0 narrative, which I feel is like a subset of Web 3.0, which is really focused mostly on sort of crypto and blockchain, is having its gauntlet, right? It's facing its gauntlet right now, and necessarily so, because speculation based on sort of economic functions is one tiny sliver of what we're talking about. We're really talking about the metaverse. The spatial web is what we would consider the spatial web, is that the IoT, or the Internet of Things, the sensors, the robots, autonomous cars, vehicles, all this smart home.
Yep.
That's the machine interface to the spatial web, and the metaverse is the human interface to the spatial web, where you're gonna basically talking and looking and seeing.
So it's
right?
like the World Wide Web was to the early internet.
Yeah, exactly. There's the machine interface, and then we use the DNS actually to translate between the various domains, but we and the machines both need to operate on this. And the difference is that in the spatial web, there isn't like this distinct line between like the virtual and the physical, meaning that there may be a virtual sort of digital twin of the engine on an airplane that I, as a maintenance worker, might need to see in the real world projected over it, that shows like where areas are getting hot or cold, or what parts have been replaced last, kind of like a digital blueprint in real time,
right?
What we call a digital twin, that's based on all the sensor data, kind of like your dashboard in your car today, but now it's a
Yep.
full representation. But I could be the guy, the field worker there doing it, and you could be in virtual reality looking at the exact same engine in the so-called metaverse. I'm in an augmented reality view, you're in a virtual reality view, and you're pointing at parts because you're the expert and saying, take this, move this, pull this here, push this here, turn this
Right.
thing, move this, put the player. And so the concept of the metaverse classically as a purely virtual experience is seeped out now. And this is why we use the term spatial web. It's not a sci-fi reference. It's like we could have as easily gotten lost in talking about what's coming as the Matrix.
Yeah.
Or the holodeck, right? And so in reality, it's kind of the confluence of these things. The main theme being that it's not a web of pages, it's a web of spaces, and all the objects and people within that. So the name verses for us did come as a nod to the metaverse, but obviously was about more than that. So we kind of thought universe, metaverse, multiverse, right? Well, what is a verse? A verse is a space with objects in it, space-time objects in it that operate under some laws. And so the idea was all of the verses equal the spatial web, right?
Got
It's connecting all the verses. That's the spatial web. And so that's kind of the nod, wink, wink of the name.
So to take your digital twin example, I think explaining it to people that have a limited understanding of Web 3.0 or moving to Web 4.0 or 5G for that matter, I sort of look at it as it's the video gamification of real world, right? It's like if I'm playing Fortnite, I've got all sorts of dials and meters and ammo counts and health meters, and I can figure out what's happening around me in the map. If I'm in your example, I'm a mechanic at Air Canada, and I have to wait till the plane lands and then get my head under the hood to see if there's anything wrong with it, as opposed to having a digital twin of every engine in the fleet with a red light blinking over the one that needs my attention. You've just saved millions of dollars on just one person, and millions of miles, and you're basically able to get much more out of your workforce. So
and lives. I mean, we've seen this applied to like ground penetrating radar. So there's huge reality is the wires, cables, gas lines underneath our cities are decades or years old,
right?
And there's all kinds. And it turns out there's tons of proprietary data sets, like where Rogers or Verizon put their lines, like it's separate from these other lines, and there's these gas explosions that happen in cities all the time, and it's because someone's on a construction site, they got the permits. They basically did an analysis, and then as far as anyone knew, from going down and looking at old records, from the late 1800s. There's nothing there, and then boom, there's something there, and it's really dangerous. So even having that kind of visibility, when you start to do ground penetrating radar scans, you can bake that information in. Now imagine the people on site able to just put on their augmented reality glasses, or have the drones have a look at it, and that data is geo positioned exactly as it's supposed to be. No, it's 5 inches to the right, And so there's that accuracy that those of these kinds of spatial data sets. And their coherence with the real world, right? Information is supposed to represent the world. And so when we start to add spatial information to the equation, it is a more accurate representation. And so we're not trying to just deal with dials and numbers and, alphanumeric representations of the world. We cognize in multiple dimensions. And that's why this is going to be a real game changer for anything. You can see it applied to medical and to to even things like, climate change. How do we tackle climate change at scale? Well, that's a totally it's like a metaphysical concept. We call them hyper objects, right? Things you can't quite get your head around. But if we're going to solve this at a collective scale, or even things like COVID, global health concerns, the kind of ways that we're able to share data, how relevant that data is, how accurate it is, whether it's coherent with the physical environment that's geolocated, whether there's local policies that we need to be aware of. Just look at the supply chain. It's amazing. When something moves from point A to point B, from one port to another port, there's a total legal and jurisdictional change, even though there's just these physical objects moving, taxes and tariffs. Imagine, again, like that Airbnb or Uber scenario, if that could all just be automated. You start to get this, what we call autonomic economy, which is really how the autonomic nervous system of the body works. But now you have something similar at planetary scale. So it is very exciting, and it's a lot of that core technology exists today. What's missing is a way to bring it all together, to make it work at scale, and to make it interoperable. And that's a big part of what we're doing, and then build our platform technology on top of that to enable all these various applications to actually be built.
To close it out, one question that I think applies to almost every tech company that's ever existed, and that is, obviously, the first guys through the wall are the ones that have the head injuries, and everyone else follows through that hole. You guys are definitely pioneers of this space, but what's to stop everybody else coming in and saying, thank you very much for doing that work. Amazon, Google, we'll take it from here. What's your moat?
Well, I actually think in this case, it is our lead time. Combined with our approach to essentially a platform. Amazon, Google, largest web companies today, they didn't build out the web protocols themselves, right? And they didn't build the core web technologies that allowed them to build the web pages. Facebook didn't do that, either. And so being able to be the first to provide that layer makes it easier and easier to get network effects of parties that start to build them themselves. One great example is Shopify. So Shopify, there was a lot of people messing around with e-commerce. The Shopify guys said, okay, we see that adding e-commerce to a website for any business is just too difficult. They developed their own language to do that. They developed their own platform for that, and they've scaled that phenomenally, and they've even built an ecosystem of thousands of developers building their own solutions on top of that. That's very similar to our approach. Now, Google and Apple and Microsoft and everyone, they didn't build a Shopify, right? And it wasn't because that they wouldn't or couldn't. It also wasn't their DNA as a company. So I also think, the fundamental DNA of a company is that driving factor. Microsoft could not make that transition to mobile. Nokia completely died when Apple came along and said, here's a whole new approach to how we interface with mobile, and it's not about how you call people and so having that core DNA gives you that main advantage, which is a bit of an angle and a vision. And if you can hit those progressive targets, then I think that the others, they either just kind of stay in their lane, or they build on top of you, right? Yeah. And so we will
or buy you for an inflated amount,
or buy you for an inflated amount. Yeah, exactly.
Man, always a pleasure talking to you. It's I'm supposed to get the negative questions in here, but it's kind of been really hard on this one because I love this deal, man. I think that you're in the beginning of something big. You're clearly the right guys for the job, and client or not, the stock is rising fast, and I find no reason to stop buying it. So, congrats on what you're doing so far. We could have got into all the big partners that you're getting, but maybe that's the next one.
I'm always happy to come back, Chris. Thanks for the time. Appreciate it.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.